Why is it when you send in your query, it can take 6, 8 weeks to get a response back? For that matter, why is it some agents never bother responding in the first place? My name is Michael Carr. I'm a literary agent with Veritas Literary, and this is How to Hook an Agent. If you're new to the channel, you might consider going ahead and clicking the subscribe button, and you can get my tips and insights about publishing and the agenting world in particular. So I want to talk a little bit about today the realities of the agenting world. Specifically, I'm going to talk about work aspects and what a typical workday looks like for me, how I go through the process of earning my living. I'm not going to specifically talk about money aspects in this particular video. That would be a subject for a different time, but this video is going to be discussing what my actual day-to-day job looks like, the good and the bad and the weird. And the first thing you should know when we're talking about queries is, unfortunately, they're kind of low priority. I try not to make them too low of priority. Myself, personally, my goal is to get them back to you, some sort of response within a couple of weeks. I don't want to do it too fast. Ironically, when I first started off, I would sometimes hit some of those queries the very first day they would come in, and that made some people angry, believe it or not. They would say, you didn't even look at it, as if it would take a full day or an hour, or in some cases even 5 minutes to determine whether or not I wanted to represent that project. But 2 weeks is a good rule of thumb for me. I'm not actually at that at the moment. I'm about 3 weeks out. And I was a little bit, and that's actually catching up a little bit. But 2 weeks is a time where I can get on top of a query, be fairly quick in the game. There are people I have signed who have had multiple offers, and the reason why they signed with me is because I was the first to respond. I got to their manuscript first, and I was the first to offer. And so they had other offers, but they were able to say, this guy's going to be responsive. That's always been one of my selling points. I'm not always 100% with that because of some things that you'll hear about here, but those queries, unfortunately, are a little bit lower on the priority list. What is the highest priority for me? Well, the highest priority is an email that comes in that is dealing with something that's pretty urgent. So if one of my writers says, people are telling me they can't order my book on Amazon right now, it's out of stock, then I need to fire off an email and find out, is that an Amazon issue that's going to be shortly resolved? Is this the publisher who needs to go back and get some more copies in place? What exactly is going on here? An author who's upset about something, an editor who's upset about something, those are urgent things. If I've got an offer coming in, this is not something that's going to come up every day or every week, but when an offer comes in, I need to be right on top of that, make sure that my author's considering it, make sure we're having conversations about it. I get in the negotiating process. You can imagine if an offer comes in on a book that I've got on submission, that if I'm reading some queries at that point, it's to kill time. I'm really going to be focused on getting that out. And the only reason I'm going to be looking at queries is because I'm literally just waiting for someone else's response on that. Of course, I've got other things that I'm juggling. Another thing that's pretty high priority for me is when I get a book that has come in by an existing writer who I represent, especially if that's under contract and the deadline is imminent. And if I get something on the 10th of the month and then my author's got to turn that into her publisher at the end of the month, then I've got to get my feedback in there quickly so that my author has a chance to do some work. Ideally, I've got a little bit more time than that, but we're all pushing right up against those deadlines. So sometimes I'll have to prioritize one book that comes in over another. Always helpful for me, and I always tell my writers, please try to give me a heads up when you think you're about a month out, and I can make sure that I have time to prioritize you. I never want to have a writer who I represent be sitting and waiting for 6 or 8 weeks for my response. But it is a big time-consuming thing. When I read a manuscript, it's not like sitting down with a novel and just reading it. and I'm done in 6 or 7 hours or however long it takes. I need to sit, read, contemplate, make notes, think about it. I might need to read that book another time. So if I've got with the number of writers I have, I'm getting new books in from them all the time, all the time. Um, another thing that has got to take priority over queries are those manuscripts that I've requested. I also have times of the year where I'm going to go out and do conferences and events. Those are a big time commitment for me. If I and during the time of the pandemic, it's been a little different. I'm supposed to be. This is summer of 2021, and I'm supposed to be going to my first in-person conference since the beginning of the pandemic. Practically the last thing I did before the pandemic, as I was presenting at a conference in Mexico, and things were heating up, and everything shut down shortly after I got back. And now I'm going back to that. But if you imagine if I go to a 3-day conference, the day before I'm trying to catch up, I've got a travel day, I come back. The next day I'm, trying to catch up on a few things. And then there's going to be a flurry of queries and partials and things that I've requested from pitch sessions and things. I'm always really generous in what I request with those things. A little bit less hard than I am with queries. Maybe it's harder to tell people no to their face, but also it's an act of bravery to talk to a professional face to face and present the book. And so I give a lot of those people, even if it's not necessarily up my alley, I give them a good chance, and that takes a lot of work. Sometimes I'm going to be involved in workshopping and evaluating manuscripts as part of a competition or some sort of workshop that's associated with that conference. We have occasional agenting trips where we will go to New York and then meet with a lot of editors. That's not happening these days, but I have virtual calls with people, some of whom I'm working with, some of whom I'm not working with. I have calls that will be involved in marketing where I'm sitting in on the conversation between the writer and the marketing team. There might be a call about covers or other aspects. I have a part of my job is a little bit psychological, where I have to kind of coach people through rough periods in their career. I'm constantly answering emails from my writers. I must get 20 a day minimum. There's some writers I represent who I'm in contact with them literally every week, and others who I hear from only on occasion. All of that takes a lot of time, and some of those are casual, and some of those are necessary but not urgent, and some of those communications are urgent. It's also typical, maybe a third of my writers, where they want to go through a little bit of brainstorming before they start on their next book, and that's never a bad idea. I can give my feedback on what I think the market wants at that point, or raise some issues. You can see on my channel that I give a lot of thought to the craft and art of writing too. So I'm not trying to put my stamp on their book or make this the book that I would have written. But at the same time, I know the questions to ask. Well, so I'm a little concerned about this character. Does she have enough of a role in this? Or these two people, could they be wrapped into one? Or maybe you could change what you're talking about, scenery here, this thing you're talking about having them meet in a coffee shop. And people do that all the time. Could you make it some other setting that's a little more interesting? Or for me to point out, here's something that I think you do really great. You should double down on that in this book. Here's something that's maybe a little bit of a weakness, or something that I have thought about a little with your last book that maybe you could work on or shore up, and these sort of things to give them ideas to help them clarify their own vision. And those sorts of things take a good deal of effort. The good news about my job is I'm working with writers and editors all the time, constantly. They're the most wonderful people in the world. If you think back to when you were in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, where you always had the book in your hand, those fellow people with the books in their hands. Those are the people who are working in this industry. And those were always the smart, funny, empathetic sort of people. And I get to work with them all the time. It's not to say every moment is wonderful or that we don't all have our little complexes, but in general, I just really like the people who work in this industry, and I get to talk about books all the time. That's a really great aspect of things. Another thing that I really like about my job is most of the time I can work from anywhere as long as I've got a good internet connection. And if I'm too far afield in terms of time zones, that I have the ability to get up super early or answer emails late in the evening. I've been involved in projects and things in Latin America, and I can go down there and volunteer or something while still putting in agenting time. I might be at that time dialing back a little bit the time that I would spend pulling in new writers and queries. That tends to be when I get a little bit behind because I need to stay on top of the more urgent agenting business, and I might be volunteering in a school library or something. There's a library project I was involved in, for example. And, so that takes up a little bit of time. But I can work from wherever. So there are times when I'll spend a couple months a year outside the country, or if my parents need help for whatever reason, I can go there for a week, and it's really no problem in terms of work. Not saying I don't have other life obligations, but in terms of work, that's a real benefit. The downside is it's the flip side of that same coin, and that is because I can work from anywhere, I do work from anywhere. So I have had cases where, a couple of weeks ago, I was hiking around in Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon National Park and here in California, and doing lengthy hikes throughout the day. And I'll tell you, there's no cell phone service out there. And so I would stop in at the visitor center where I could get Wi-Fi to check my stuff. And then I really have to deal with these things. I don't feel like I can be disconnected for more than a few hours at a time. Even overnight sometimes feels problematic. I got up this morning, and at 6 a.m, I saw that there was an email from a publisher in the UK who was publishing one of my books. And I wanted to get my response out before they left for the day. So I'm frequently checking my email and responding to things first thing in the morning, in the evening, on the weekends. It doesn't always feel like work because again, these are interesting conversations and things that are kind of fun to do. But I also don't want to be a workaholic where I'm just constantly nose to the grindstone. So a lot of times it feels like I'm just working around the clock, but I'm also goofing off around the clock or doing things. Recording this video, for example, there will probably be an email or two popping in because I've got some stuff out there that I'm waiting to hear about. And the very first thing I'm going to do once I finish this email is go deal with those sort of things. So I have a lot of flexibility to do that. I am also a big into language study, and so I have a class every day. Today I have a class in French to kind of work on that a little bit. Most days it's Portuguese, which is where most of my studies are at these days. But I can schedule those almost whenever, as long as I don't have some other sort of call that's scheduled with a writer or an editor. And so I have an enormous amount of flexibility, but it sometimes feels like there's just constant need to stay in contact and to be checking my email. So not everything is wonderful. All in all, I really don't think that or that many better jobs. Maybe the only thing that would really improve this job would be if I had an extra zero at the end of my annual salary, and then I didn't have to kind of scrounge as much for money like we all do. But that's maybe gives you a little bit of an understanding, and I don't want you to think that your queries that you're sending me or to other agents aren't important. But we do still have to think about how, as a business, how we're going to earn a living and have to concentrate and dedicate our efforts on working with those writers and editors and established relationships we already have, because that is where the money comes from.